Welcome. I'm Rogers Anderson, Williamson County Mayor, and I have a special show today to bring to you a gentleman that most everyone that watches this show will know is Calvin Lehew. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for asking me.
So everyone knows Calvin Lehew, maybe not everyone, but a lot of people.
Not the newcomers.
Not the newcomers. Well, they don't know the city. They don't know the city and county mayor either.
No.
Talk to me a little bit about Calvin Lehew and where you were born, and to a little bit of the history, how you grew up, and I'll probably jump in every now and then. And I know that your life really started over in Hillsboro, which is now called Leapers Fork.
Right. Yes. I didn't like them changing that name, but yeah, my father had a sawmill out that area, Parker Branch Road, and we also had a store that we lived above the store. The building doesn't have the second floor now, but the bottom part is still there. My father had a third grade education, my mother had a sixth grade education, but they were very hard workers, and my mother had me in church every time the doors were open, and my father taught me about ethics and being a hard worker and conservative and so forth. So it was fun being out there at Hillsboro, and our school at that time didn't have indoor plumbing. So young people wouldn't understand what that means, of course, but we did have it at our store, but it was fun living out there. It still is.
So how big was your family? And I know you have a sister.
I had a twin sister, and then also have an older sister, about 10 years older.
Now, we're not going to talk about age.
Okay. But this was, as you know, a hospital, and my mother died here, and my father, they told me in this building that my father probably wouldn't live over 3 or 4 more months. And it was such a shock to me. They both died when I was a teenager. So that started my life differently. Mrs. Albert Gore, Al Gore's mother, was a friend of the family back then, back before Senator Gore got in Congress and all. And she heard about this, and she invited me to come to Washington. I had been a page in Washington in 1956. So then my father and mother died in 1958. So I went back to Washington, and my parents wanted me to be the first Lehew to ever go to college. I hated every day of school, but I was going to do it because of them. And Mrs. Gore said, "You're not coming up here unless you stay in college." UT admitted me, even though I had nothing but C grades, and I was happy with that. So three colleges turned me down because of my grades at UT. But finally, George Washington said, "Yes, we will keep you in here if you never drop below a 3-point, a B average." Well, I had a goal then, and so I majored in economics and minored in psychology and philosophy, which I liked, about the mind. And so that just motivated me, and then Mrs. Gore, one day, she stopped me in the Hall of Congress. And by the way, I was Al Gore's babysitter. I taught him everything he knew, the internet, global warming. He's 10 years younger than me. But anyway, that's a joke. She stopped me in the Hall of Congress one day. She said, "Calvin, what are you going to do with your life?" She was a very strong lady and just really a great person. And I had to come up with something real quick. I said, I'm going to be a congressman. "Well, that's well and good. Then you need to go back to UT and graduate there and start building your little group of people." I hated to leave Washington. It's the center of the universe. I got to know 5 presidents while I was there: Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, on a daily personal basis, because being a page in the Senate and all, when they were there. And it was just, I don't want to leave this place. But I went back, and then I started realizing I don't want to be a congressman. I want to be free. I want to be able to do what I want. I want to fly planes and so forth. So even though my mother my mother being very religious, I felt like I needed to go to church and all. So I went to hear Dr. Norman Vincent Peale at the Marble Collegiate Church. I would go on the weekend and take the train up to New York. And that's where I got to know Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. Got to be personal friends with him. And that's a whole nother story there. But that kind of started my life off there. Well, so Peale gets this talking about positive living and so forth. It wasn't a lot about a hellfire and damnation, which the church I was in and given. And so then I met, after meeting Peale, then it became Earl Nightingale, Clement Stone, and some of these mine, all about the mine. I heard about Tony Robbins and how you could walk across hot burning coals without burning your feet. I want to learn how to do that. And I set my goal to be a millionaire at age 35. Well, when you do that, the mind just takes over and you become what you think about. And my fraternity brother and I said, what can we open? We went down to Tallahassee, Florida to open up a Jerry's restaurant. We couldn't borrow enough money to do that.
Now, what was the Jerry's restaurant?
It was like a chain, fast food, so forth. And we said, we don't want to leave Tallahassee. Florida State's here. The capital is here. What can we open? We'd seen a drugstore up in north somewhere. Now, let's open up a discount drugstore. And I mean, we were crazy, of course. I didn't have parents to tell me I was crazy. We borrowed some money to open up we called it Freeway National. We wanted something to sound big and national. And we discounted every item every day at least 20%. The normal merchandise markup is 40%. So we had to sell twice as many goods to make the same profit as our competition. We not only sold twice as much goods, this was 1963. We sold 3, 4, and 5 times as much. Those Florida State girls found out about us first, and then their mothers, and they'd bring the station wagons in. Remember Aquanet hairspray?
I sure do.
We sold it by the hundreds of cases. It was so cheap. Well, then we opened one in Albany, Georgia. Albany, they call it Albany, Georgia. Dothan, Alabama, Gainesville, Florida, and so forth. And we had stores in 3 states there. And then something told me to come home and get in the construction business with my brother-in-law, Kenneth Holt, who, by the way, did a lot of work, Holt and Lehew Construction.
And I need to interrupt you. Kenneth Holt was one of the finest men I ever knew in the construction business.
He married my twin sister.
Yes, he did. And I first was introduced to Keyhole, as we called it.
Yeah, that was his nickname.
And on the work that he was doing here, he was a man, for those in the audience that know him, a handshake and his word was all you needed.
Yes.
And to the day that he put on the addition in front of the administrative complex, the old hospital that we have here, I came to him and I said, Kenneth, we just need to dress up this old building. Now it's kind of like taking an old hog and putting lipstick on it, but at the same time we needed to dress that up. And he came back with some plans. He said, I think I can do that. And there was an old concrete out front of this building. It had solid concrete that protruded out across the driving area. Back in those days, people drive under the portico or the roof, get out and go into the hospital. Well, they don't do that here. Everybody parks out in the front. Kenneth came up with this format we got now and raised the roof because vehicles have gotten taller over the years, and just redesigned that whole front. And today it is still functional, no leaks, and it's unbelievable the skill set that man had. Just a fine man.
I recognize that. He was working as a carpenter for Pete Gunnell back in those days, and he was happy there. But I had ambitions and wanted to do things. And
so what did you do with your retail store? Did you sell it to your partner?
Back to my partner, yes.
So you came to town and
I didn't have money though because he was expanding, but he paid me over a period of time. Harold Pierce was his name, and he did well. But I talked Kenneth. I said, let's go in the construction business, and he said, I told him, I said, I can do the financing the banking and so forth like that, and selling and so forth. So we bought a lot in Meadow Green Acres, where I had lived at the time, for $2,000. We built like a $14,000 house. That was big money back then, and made a $2,000 profit. Then we went to Grassland Estates and bought 2 or 3 down there from Union Trust Company. And I said, you know, we ought to have our own subdivision. I had to pay it, having to pay. So we bought the land out here in Westfield Estates. It's on New Highway 96 out there. And we ran the water line out there. We had to make a bigger line because we knew the expansion and so forth was going to happen out there. So one day I'm figuring up my net worth of the bank, and I'm a millionaire at age 33, not 35. I wasn't any happier. I found out money does not bring you happiness. In fact, I had more problems than I ever did. I had leaky roofs, stopped up commodes, and all these things, real estate and so forth. But the thing that really fascinated me, this stuff works. I set in the goal, people, and Jesus was trying to teach us what you think about, you bring about. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. So I wanted to I was president of the Chamber of Commerce back then, and the Interstate Highway system came through. Eisenhower at the time came up with this idea of the interstate because he'd been over in Europe and all, and the Autobahn and so forth. And I tell people, I had a little bit to do with creating the Interstate Highway. When I was a page, 1956, it was Eisenhower, and Albert Gore Sr. was the co-author of that bill. And while in the Senate, it was passed, and I took the bill to the next category, or whatever it's supposed to be, in my hand.
So you were a part of it.
Yes, big deal.
Before you take us on the journey of getting into construction or going beyond that, you said something that a lot of people, you were involved with Kennedy and Eisenhower and Johnson.
Nixon.
And Nixon and probably Ford?
No, not Ford. Eisenhower, Nixon. Oh, can I insert this one thing? It's a little comic relief here. Oh, I'm also an elevator operator up there at that time. And this guy gets on my elevator by himself, which was unusual, and he was kind of short, and I'm not tall, but he was like that. And I said, "Mister, has anybody ever told you look like Harry Truman?" He put his hand up on my shoulder. "Son, I am Harry S. Truman."
Are you kidding me?
And it made my day. And he was going up to the Senate gallery to observe the Senate in session and all by himself, no bodyguard, anything like that. But I didn't count him as one of my 5. But
well, my question is, go back into the assassination of Kennedy. And you would have been in Washington about that time, or you had already gone to Florida?
I was in Florida then.
I'd love to know the mood in Washington at that time. I know the mood. I remembered as a boy seeing that horrific act in Dallas. And it was the first time that I guess that I could remember, Calvin, that live television captured well, short of thereafter, the tapes, but the actual Jack Ruby, when he came back in and shot Oswald, and our whole country was in turmoil, scared, trying to set the stone. We'll not get too serious on this show, but just a couple of years prior to that, we'd had confrontation with Cuba and the Bay of the Pigs and many, many things in history. And it would be nice to know with an inside position, even though you were in Florida, that's got to have scared you a little bit as a young businessman, or maybe you didn't think about it, maybe you didn't have enough thought processes in life at this point to understand what that really meant. I'm not sure as a teenager I really fully understood how this country rebounded from that, but we did.
Yes.
We did.
Yes.
And Kennedy was a very controversial president going in, but he was elected by a very large majority of people, and he was endeared in this country for so many things.
Yes.
And the assassination, and of course the whole personal side of the story with his wife, who went on to have a full life for many years. But the whole Kennedy family and the tragic events that happened with the brothers and the son, the Robert, and so many of the others that happened. There's plenty of books written on that, but it'd be nice to know if you ever had a comment on that.
Yes, I got to know them, of course, on a personal basis daily. And when I was an elevator operator, Jacqueline would get on the elevator with her children, the boy and the girl, John they called him.
John and Caroline.
And Caroline, they would get on my elevator, and I would have fun times with them and let them maybe run the elevator. That was back when they had the hand operator. And
Harvey's had one of those.
Oh, yes, and I think was it Harvey's that first came out with the escalator.
Yes.
Kane Sloan.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I remember going. But anyway, did I interrupt you on
No.
that? Okay. So where was I on this? So I
kind of talking about the history of Jacqueline and how it was
yes.
and the Kennedy and the mood.
Oh, something else that happened too is that John had, what was the name of the magazine? Maybe it was John or something. He had a magazine out, and he wanted to interview Garth Brooks. And he called Garth Brooks and told him that he would meet him anywhere in the United States to get an editorial written about him, so forth. And he said, well, there's this place in Franklin, Tennessee called The Factory, and I'd like to be there and interview. So his agents called and set up the time and wanted to be private, of course, like we did a lot of time with stars coming in the factory and all, and they didn't want to be known to the public. So we set up a meeting, a room next to my office, and that's where I got to meet John. And it was just so much fun meeting celebrities and people like that. But the unfortunate thing then, right after that, he had this plane crash and he killed there, which really got me. I mean, I was close to him, and I hate to see things like that happen to people. The Kennedys have gone through a lot of horrible things.
The mother's name, the Kennedys, Mrs. Kennedy, President Kennedy's, what her name, Ethel, or?
You talking about Jacqueline?
Yes. No, John Kennedy's mother. I don't remember her name, but
I'm having a blank space right now.
I'm drawing a blank space.
Oh, yeah.
But you know, she lost, I think, so many children.
Yes.
in between World War II and just tragic accidents to that family, and and even on into John, as you called him. I mean, the male side of that family's just had unbelievable.
Robert Kennedy.
Kennedy and all of them. So I interrupted your journey as you were talking about you, but I was you'd come back, you'd met with Mr. Holt and going to do construction, and all of a sudden you found you were a millionaire at 33. And
I'm not any happier, anything, but this stuff works. When you set a goal, believe in it, have faith, and act, you can do, be, and have anything you desire. That was what Peel told me, and I had to go out and walk on hot burning coals. I couldn't believe that. You mean walk across hot burning coals without burning your feet? Tony Robbins taught us, I was one of like 6 or 8 of us, he told us to look up, don't look down. This is symbolism too. That's life. Don't look down, the negative, look up. So I got in line there, and I think I was like the second one, and I walked across those hot burning coals and looking up and visualizing walking across cool moss, he told us. And it worked. I couldn't believe it. I came back around after I finished, and I thought, maybe I'm hypnotized. Maybe that's not. I came back and tried to touch the coals, and it was so hot you couldn't even get close to them. But that was amazing. And so the mine was my intriguing part. But I got off on studying about the Interstate Highway bill, and it was introduced. It was one of the greatest things that ever happened to our country. But the bad news is it killed little downtowns all over the country. Franklin was just dead. And I was president of the Chamber of Commerce at the time. And I said, guys, we cannot compete with Kmart, Walmart, Sears, and Dillard's. Let's be different. I was over in Europe in the Air National Guard, and I fell in love with the narrow little cobblestone streets, the baker living above the bakery shop, sidewalk cafes. I said, this is what we need to do. I couldn't sell it. So I went up on Columbia Avenue with Kenneth Holt. I just coming back to Kenneth. We never had a disagreement that I remember. We always worked together and so forth. And I said, Kenneth, let's build this little, what Southern Living called a European village with a Southern flair. And right across from the Carter House, back then nobody could care about the Civil War or battlefield or whatever. But I thought, I am going to show that to myself and others that tourism is the route we need to go. And that's probably the biggest, craziest thing I ever did, was to build 26 shops and restaurants. Only about 1/4 of them are there now. The others have been bulldozed down and all. And the guy was going to bulldoze everything down, but I guess he changed his mind. But anyway, Miss Daisy's came along. That was our first, and she was about to pull out because her partner was pulling out, didn't think that this would go. Here again, banks turned me down. I had to go out of state to get financing because nobody
for
around.
Carter's Court.
To do Carter's Court. And so finally, I said, Daisy, if you'll just stay in there, Marilyn and I will be your silent partners. So that's a whole nother story about how horrible we've owned 4 restaurants, Choices, Miss Daisy's, the Stove Works and so forth. But you have to make a lot of volume to make that much profit. And we opened that, and Miss Daisy's, and I would come down from upstairs and work the cash register, kind of like taking that money into. And the ladies would say, that beef casserole, so do you have a recipe on that? That cream chicken, oh, that was so great. Can you give me a recipe? Oh, click. And I delegate everything. I get the credit, but I delegate it all out. And I said, Daisy and Marilyn, y'all need to get a cookbook out here. And we finally did, and I think we had printed up. I wanted to print up 1,000 because it was cheaper per unit the more you did. And Marilyn is very conservative. My wife is very conservative, smart, and we marry opposites if you didn't know. So she didn't want to do but like 250 or so, but we settled on 500. I think Daisy wanted more too. We sold out of that Miss Daisy's little yellow cookbook. We sold out before Christmas, and then we had more printed up, and we have, to this day, we've sold over 1 million copies of that little. That's what earned us the money, was that cookbook, not the food, and it's fabulous. But that's a little side trip, but it worked. And
so did you all do? I mean, today, many churches do a cookbook. Did you all actually do the typing, the ingredients, or to have someone to do that for you, or was it some big publishing house?
No, I didn't know that you're supposed to go to a publishing house. So there was a guy who had a printing press down on First Avenue, past the Masonic Lodge down there, and in his back building there. And I got him to print those
individual sheets.
Yes.
Oh, I've got one. I remember.
Oh.
I remember
little yellow cookbook.
The little yellow cookbook that's sitting in my house.
Plastic rings.
Maybe it's
on
time to reprint them again, or I guess you still keep.
Oh, we're still printing them. Yes, yeah, we still get royalty checks on those. They don't look exactly the same, but that was a fabulous. But we went on to Carter's Court, bringing the traffic in. It was just fabulous. It became the 7th largest tourist attraction in Tennessee, mainly because of. What was the big thing, Opryland. Opryland was over there. And they would have 3 buses, an average of 3 buses out there. We had lunch at Miss Daisy's, see the Battle-O-Rama, which we put up, and visit the Carter House, $6.95, all of that. Unbelievable. So I sold it, and I wanted, I told you about becoming the millionaire, and I wasn't happy. But that stuff works. I want to learn more about this. How? There was a church out there that you could call and pray for people. They would pray for you, or people, you would give your names, they would say, and people would be healed. I wanted to learn about that. And my wife, conservative, she didn't want to go, and a lot of my friends told me, if don't go out there. In fact, one of my best friends said, if you go out there, I was on 14 board of directorships at one time, civic, social, church, bank, so forth. And but I was tired of going to meetings. That was one thing. When I leave, I could resign from all these boards. But there was one board I wanted to be on that was just starting then. It was called people thought I had joined the Scientology. Back then, that was a big thing and all, but I stayed away from Scientology. I wanted to study that particular church. So my wife agreed. We went out after selling Carter's Court. We had paid off our debts then, almost all. And then out there, we bought a home in La Jolla, California. And I would study all about the mind and the firewalking, and got with Tony Robbins and so forth. So that was the most intriguing part of my life, probably. And Edgar Mitchell was an astronaut, and he walked on the moon, and he got back in space capsule, and he had what he told me was it was like a religious experience. He felt one with everything, the capsule, planet Earth, when he was looking back and all. When he got back to our planet, he resigned from NASA and joined, he started the Institute of Noetic Science, the study of the mind. And of course, that was my interest, and I joined. That was been 40 years ago. And about 5 years ago, they called me and asked me if I would be on their board of directors. I had not been on any boards up until then, and so I had always told my wife, I said, if they asked me, I would join. So I'm on that board of directors. We have about 5 meetings a year. I have to fly out to San Francisco, and we have a campus of about 200 acres. We study the mind. We have a place, a scientific laboratory. We have like a cell, a room about this size that has got 2 foot thick walls that sound, no kind of vibrations can get out. We do tests on the mind. It's just fabulous. That's my big interest now, and thank goodness I didn't become a congressman. But that's where I like to be now, studying all about this.
So you're in this time, you and your wife, you're in California. How'd you wind up back here again?
Okay, I'm in a hot tub, enjoying, and Marilyn hollers out, "Johnny Noel's on the phone." I go back, and we'd been out there 2 years. She was ready to come home, and I was kind of ready to.
Now, was she a local girl?
No, she was a damn Yankee from Pennsylvania. Can I say that word on TV?
It's too late. We can't cut it. Go for it.
Opposite. Well, you marry opposites, you know. She's professional, and she's been a teacher all these years and so forth. But we've been married 54 years as of a month or so ago. So she's helped me in getting the success going in the restaurants and all. She gets the credit there.
So Johnny called you and said,
"Oh, yeah.
Come on back."
Johnny said, "Calvin, what you wanted to do with Franklin, we can now do. There are 20-something buildings for sale. Ed Stallman, he's dead now, but he said."
Now this was about what year?
Marilyn could tell you right like that. This was
80s?
I guess the start of the 80s, maybe. Downtowns were dead. I mean, it was just, I didn't know what to do. And so I was motivated, and I came back. Johnny and Ed and I bought those 20-something buildings. I bought 7 of them, 4th and Main, where the restaurant is there now, and back, Mary D's was one of my first tenants. We went all the way to the alley back there, and then 4 on Main Street. 7 buildings for $350,000. 7. Today, any one would be $2 million. Nice. Unbelievable. It was just great, and I'm happy we're going this way, and the values are going up. Rent was $6 per square foot. Today, it's over $30 per square foot. And we didn't want any Kmart, Walmart, Sears, and Dillard's. We stayed out of that. But then one day, Mary Pierce calls me and said, "Calvin, we got a problem. Was the city or the county owned Jameson Bedding owned all that land. Was it the county?
We did not.
Oh, it was the city?
It was the city.
The city owned that. Okay, that's right. The city owned all this. And yeah,
I think they did that in industrial development deal several years ago.
It was, but it sat vacant, nothing done.
Vacant
They
for
put
years.
Buses there,
Right.
the county school buses were there and all. But holes in the roof and all. And Mary Pierce said, the city is getting ready to let a film company blow it up for the film effects and so forth. It's not all that historic, but buildings should be preserved, something done to them. And I agreed, and so the first person I called was Wynonna Judd. Wynonna was a waitress for us at Miss Daisy's. So, and we became friends thereafter, and after her success and all, she called me one day and said, "Calvin, what I'd like to do is find a building big enough that we could have games, have plays, shows, concerts, and to get the kids off the street, a place that they could be." And that's it. That's big enough to have. And so I brought Wynonna and Naomi, Larry, and their manager out and showed them around. Of course, it looked horrible and things falling down and all this, asbestos and so forth. So they just turned it down. But the manager was the main one, I think. And so I brought another guy, too, out from Nashville that would call for my advice about how to invest in Williamson County and so forth. And he couldn't see it. Every time I'd show it, I could see possibilities because I'd done Carter's Court and how successful that became. So then I called the mayor and I said, "I'll take it." They were asking $650,000, 47 acres. It was originally 17 buildings, but like 2 of them had fallen down and were saving and so forth. And he said, "Well, to make it legal, we need to advertise it 3 times in the paper and have a sealed bid." I said, "Okay." Well, this time I was the highest bidder of $1 million. And here's a point I should make. If I had known, they taught me in school, in college, in real estate, you do feasibility studies, market analysis, and traffic count, so forth. These things you have to do.
Sure.
If I had done that, I had no way. And 4 banks turned me down. So I went to, there were 3 of us, yeah. One was a church. But couldn't get financing, even where I had been a director. They didn't want to fool with it because of all the problems and so forth with it. And so finally, Rick Moody was the president of First Tennessee Bank. We were friends. And he brought the guys from Memphis up and took them around, showed them my successful record that I had done in construction and so forth, drugstores. And they said, finally, number 1, quit flying experimental aircraft. I think Marilyn had something to do with that. She hasn't agreed to it yet, because I had lived through 5 major plane crashes. This is where I lost the audience, I think. Marilyn says I got brain damage on the first one. But then, because I keep on. By the way, I've got a new ultralight helicopter now. I'm flying helicopters. But back to the story. Oh, so here again, I give these talks sometimes to young people about success in life and so forth. Success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. It's not just making money, you earn money and so forth. But anyway,
Rick brought those guys in from First Tennessee.
oh yeah, and
They said
number
you had to
one,
stop flying.
quit flying experimental aircraft. Number two, you put $1 million of your not borrowed money. So I had to sell, and it was one or two other things. It loaned you the money as you build each building and going back. And the first one was Barbara Mandrell. She came in and put over $1 million of their money and so forth in that, and then it was the next and that. But if I had known, done my homework first, that the environmental alone was $1 million, asbestos, underground storage tanks and stuff like this, I would have never done that. But a lot of my success is getting into not knowing what you're getting into. But if you keep the faith and believe in it and act, that's what stops most people taking action, you know, signing the contract, so forth. But it was fabulous. We took off, and I didn't want a Kmart, Walmart, Sears, Dillard's, or anything like that there. I wanted people that were artists, creative people, and they're the worst tenants you can have because they got a right brain and not much of a left brain. But after 3 or 4 years, it started netting over $1 million a year. I had 67 tenants there, and a lot of my success was just in happenings. But one day I'm thinking, I'm in where Jameson Hall is, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do here? And there's the antique mall is right there joining this line here. Maybe they'll be successful and won't take this space in. Well, ironically, this little girl comes, I say a little girl, lady, comes and she says, Mr. Lehew, I read about what you're doing here and I like that. Could I get married here? And we're literally standing there where I'm trying to figure out what to do, Jameson Hall. I said, yes. You can. She was the answer to what I ought to have weddings and concerts and things like this here. So her mother came, by the way, like a week later with her hands like this. You expect to get married in a place like this? But we did, she did, and we had it ready. And it was so successful, Jameson Hall, with the concerts and all, those big rafters, big beams, you could hang props off of it. And it was just ideal to do concerts and so forth there. It brought in more rent per square foot than any of the shops, the amount of income. So Liberty Hall was the big open area down there. I'm going to open up another one. And churches came. Churches changed. People wanted to get married, younger people wanted to get married in a place like the factory instead of a professional looking, clean church. And they wanted to go to church in a place like this instead of the tall steeple and all. I had 3 churches there for a long time, and there's still one church still there. But anyway, that was a real great thing to do, those 67. Now, we had the problems, yes. Back rent, a lot of things not paid. I had swapped out. I've got a pool table in my Florida home. And, oh, by the way, while we were down there in Florida, we would go down to the beach area just south of Tallahassee, Apalachicola, and while I was down there 54 years ago, I said, Marilyn, when we get out of debt, I'm coming down here and buying a house on the beach. Well, we've been in debt all that time until sold the factory, this 4 or 5 years ago. And I made a mad dash down there, and real estate values were so low. I bought over $1 million home on the beach for half that. It was just fabulous. We'll be taking off next week or so, going down there again.
So, I think most people around here know you and you and your wife's involvement with Carter's Court, and I think the ones that know that, I also know that your involvement with the factory and how you basically in the Carter's Court started from scratch in the factory, revitalizing, retooling, saving. And when I think of Calvin Lehew, I moved here in 1980. Carter's Court was a place to go. It was one of the few places that you could go for a sit-down meal other than the Holiday Inn on Highway 96. There were 0 restaurants in downtown.
Yes.
0. And I remember as I was a younger man, and some of the real estate and the profession I was in was in the commercial insurance, and I was trying to raise a family. But I often look back at those days and should have bought some of those buildings. But I became involved from the county side, and my first really familiarization in 1986 was with a program called Streetscape and Mary Pierce.
Yes.
At that time, I think Dr. Jeff Bethurem was the mayor. If it wasn't, it was Lillian Stewart. But I think it was, Jeff Bethurem, Dr. Bethurem. And here, over on the county side, was Bob Ring as the county executive during that period of time. And that's when I was first introduced, because I thought education was the key for our community. There was about 4 or 5 of us, Judy Hayes being one of those, that believed in public education, that is a way to elevate and bring your community up. And as you know, you're a product, and I had parents in East Tennessee that were very similar to yours. They were hard working, wanted more for their children than they had. So many of us had those. It was almost like they were cloning our mothers.
Yes.
And daddies went off to work. Mothers instilled in us as boys and girls to do the best you can. Education wasn't what it is today. I think they had a school bus, but I didn't ride it. You get on your bike or walk, because you could stop at the creek.
Yes.
You could do other things to make school palatable. For me, during that period of time, I became very engaged in sports. I was a big teenager, so I could play some sports, and of course, baseball was the sport of the time for most of us. And then, of course, the military for so many of us. And you look back on Williamson County, and you think of men and women that have made a major contribution to this community and had an influence on what it is today in 2017. You look at the success of, you were talking about this, the store that you and your friends started in Tallahassee. Well, I remember there was I believe it was called a National Store on the Square. I may be wrong on the name, but they sold clothes, and I remember the senator Cliff Frensley was involved in that store, and I know there was 2 or 3 of those.
Mm-hmm.
But you look back at the time and the way history has changed, and the place that we live in today. You're talking about buying pieces of property as on the square for $4 and $5 and $6 billion for less than $1 million. Today, you'd be buying them by the inch, or certainly by the foot. I may be a little analytical there. I think back at Leaper's Fork, which was Hillsboro, and it was a very rural, poor part of our county. That and the first district, Fairview. And today, great men and women, country music stars, everyone wants to be a part of Williamson County.
Wynonna Judd stopped me one day. She says, "Calvin, don't let people hear about Hillsboro." That's what back then. Because they were starting to move in and buying up land.
Yeah. And it hasn't stopped.
No.
I just recently saw where another large star bought
Justin
Timberlake.
Yeah.
And then his manager, and then just in the last week, I've seen another one. So it continues to do that. It continues. I was at a meeting just recently this week talking about public education probably elevated our community because we invested our money. We invested your tax dollars, my tax dollars, to transform public education in what way you and I learned.
Yes.
And with that, that brought good people, higher education, socioeconomics, and it also brought better jobs. It brought, I remember Jerry Sharber, and there was a fight, but there was a huge battle about the mall back in the late 80s and early 90s. On a field, a blank field. We're still a young community when you think back. Just 25 years ago, the mall was actually put in. There were strawberry fields, cornfields.
Johnny Noel owned that.
That Johnny did.
And we used to land our airplanes right there on where the mall is now.
And remember, for those that are watching this show today or 25 years from now, I forgot what it was called, but it was a big tower that was out there in the Southwest Book Company.
Oh, yes, yes.
Remember the big blue tower that
Yes.
was there on Moore's Lane, and it leveled that whole area, and today I guess that's where Costco is, and some of those is in that general area out there, Costco and things. But this whole transformation of Williamson County, you had a piece in that. Mr. Moody had a piece in that.
Yes.
Many people have had their fingers in that pie to make it the community that we have today, from the people of the business side, but the political leaders too.
Teachers had a big effect.
Teachers.
That didn't get credit, but W.C. Yates
Mr.
was one of my
Yates.
favorite teachers, and teaching agriculture and so forth.
Today, we have just finished the 2017 fair. I don't know how many people were out there, but the fair has got its focal point of education, agriculture, and that's never changed. It was gone for 55 years. That was brought back. We'll see 225,000 people, but the whole arena floor was made up of this new thing we call STEM: science, technology, engineering, and math. Set up stations for our children to come in and learn about science, learn about education, and how we're going to apply those in the future generations to the life we live in today. When I think about agriculture at the fair this year, we were showing, we've done it every year, but there are no pigs farms in Williamson County anymore. None. So we're having to bring in a sow from Henry County, and thank goodness there's a gentleman out there that allows us to bring that in, and so she can birth her piglets, and those piglets can be seen by our boys and girls, and it's fascinating. The whole farming, agriculture, from the time you take a child and you put an apron on him and a bucket and take a seed and plant it, and it's all artificial, it's all fake, but at the end they can buy that product.
That's happening at my farm, which joins West Haven.
Yes.
We're just out of we're touching the city limits, but we're not in it. And I have a 250-acre farm there that I bought from the Hugheses. It's on Blazer Road there in Southall. And we've put it on the land trust.
Yes.
It can never be subdivided. It cut the value, money-wise, in half. But we don't have children that will inherit our property and so forth. And so we felt like we need to do something that would, because of all the mass housing and all around, we need that 250 acres to be like a park, where you can sell it to anybody and all. But Alex Noble was my fraternity brother, and then he had a son, Justin, and he met a girl in, I think, Nebraska or somewhere, and they fell in love, and they both love goats. They rent from us and have for the last 10 years or so. They raise goats there, and they have tours that come out. little kids just really love these goats and seeing the goats. They sell all the cheese that they make. I had the farmers market there at the factory. I got that idea in California when I was living out there. They had farmers markets that were 7 days a week, but of course our farmers market is only on Saturday.
Right.
And they sell all the cheese that they make there, and they've got over 200 goats now at the farm. They take up about 50 acres maybe in my house that I had there, but they're now starting to entertain and having tours and all. It's another product, and they're there and they have their products. They sell them right there too.
Well, and I think, Calvin, when you look at the demographics of our community and just talk a few numbers, 50% of the people that live in Williamson County were not born in this state, not county. And so we're seeing people from California and Michigan and all points, and yes, that brings traffic, and yes, that brings congestion, but it also brings diversity and different way, and people challenge your established way of thinking. Speaking to a group just last night, why don't you let up on some of the zoning in the unincorporated area of our county? Well, that's not the model we've used. The model we've used is the cities grow, they've got to provide the infrastructure, the sewer and the water and the roads and things. But the unincorporated area, for the most part, over the last 10 years, has been left unscathed through land trusts such as yourself, people buying large tracts of land. There are subdivisions that are started, but you back out the annexation, Joe Horn, community development, through the last 5 years, we've only grown like 200 some odd new residents. Now realize the city annexes, so you're taking some off the rolls. But I think it is important that we take lessons from you and lessons from other men and women that have come through, that the county's about 850 square miles. And we need to preserve that unincorporated area the best we can.
Yes.
We need to save what we don't. Everybody will tell you they don't want to turn it into Atlanta. Well, the only way to avoid turning into Atlanta is have a master plan that makes it very, very difficult to develop out into communities. Thank goodness the county, Williamson County government, is not in the sewer business. We're in the septic business, and you cannot put density on septic tanks. It just doesn't work. And when you look at retail operations, sales tax dollars, there's not enough money generated off from sales tax in the coffers that I worry about. It's about $3 million a year, whereas just in Franklin alone, it'll get close to 40 and 50 million and upwards of sales tax. So I thank you for bringing some of those ideas. Yes, you brought in Carter's Court and Choices and all these other places, but you have demonstrated to a lot of people through your efforts, and Mary Pierce, that we have to preserve, we have to save, we have to work hard at keeping what we've got here in our community sacred to us. And yes, everybody wants to live here, and yes, they love the public education. All of those have proven wonderful tools to get to where we are today. But I look at Leapers Fork, which was old Hillsborough. The leadership out there really doesn't want public utilities. They like the quaintness, they like to save it that way. They're not interested in having the national chains out there. National chains would love to be out there, but they can't put it on out there. So you are a forerunner. I think as you were telling your story, you tried a lot of things when you were younger and you put your mind to it. I think a lot of us have put our mind, probably didn't do it as deliberately as you, more times than not, probably.
Low IQ helps.
Yeah, if that's the case, I'll be successful. We've got, Heather just came out and said we have 4 or 5 minutes left.
I'd like to say one last thing.
I'd like to ask you to, you say what you want, and I want to ask you one question. Go ahead, you're first.
There's one last thing that I'm working on right now that is helping my life, and it's being with Brightstone. You familiar with Brightstone? It's for adults that have disabilities, mental disabilities. I was introduced with them, so sometime back they would come to the factory and we'd let them have the halls at no charge, and they're so great. If you go and visit with them, and they'll let you do this, those, I call them kids because some of them are kind of young like, but 21 years old and older. They have a waiting list of people wanting to get in, and I am helping them now get the farm that Dr. Greer had out. You go south on like going to Columbia, and past Pam Lewis's house on the right, and past the school that's out there. We have 200 acres there, and we're going to, this what you said about preserving that, we're going to preserve all of this, there's a barn or two on it, and the big house up on the hill, have events and so forth, is my suggestion to them instead of selling it off. But it is gorgeous, and we are planning a farm there with animals, and there's going to be gardening. These people work. They love working. They make that where they are now in that small area, and they have how many, let's see, a waiting list that's like 2 years off and all. But those people work with clay, they work with different things, and they can clean, and they enjoy their work of doing things with the other kids, and so I call them kids, but this is going to be something that's going to help. It's going to be, there's nothing like it in the state of Tennessee, what we're planning to do. But it's going to be fabulous, and I would invite anybody that has an interest in this, if you've got a child that's needing this, and we're going to
Special needs.
We're going to have a place so that they can live day and night. That's going to be unusual too.
2 minutes left. Got to ask you, what would you tell the leadership of this community today, and you're still a leader, what to look for in the future?
What a question. Well, we are being transformed. We are evolving. This is the future. I like preserving our nature, especially having big open areas, forest and so forth, preserving our downtown buildings and so forth like that. But individually, the technology is taking over, whether you like it or not, and we are going into higher dimensions of, that's what we're studying about the mind now, how we can think and cause things to happen. So this is the future. But I'd like to see the physical, the mental, and the spiritual come together more.
I don't know how I can top that.
That's all I have to say about that.
You sound like Forrest Gump, and so we'll leave Calvin Lehew and Forrest Gump on the same plane, and somebody will watch this and say, "Who is Forrest Gump?"
Yes, he's one of my favorites.
Oh, I love the show. I'm Rogers Anderson. It's been my pleasure to sit and talk with you all today. And Calvin, thank you for what you've done, you and your family, and your ideas, and your hands, and upbringing your mama to be proud of you.
Well, my father said, and my mother too, when you give, you receive. That's the law of the universe.
It is. Have a good day. I'm Rogers Anderson. See you around the next time.